you know. But this is exactly the lifeline which goes a moment a cyclone strikes. This very lifeline, which was a kind of a barrier, which sort of which marks the settled islands off from the forested delta. And Sundarbans, when we refer to Sundarbans, we include all of this in plurality. That is why it's called Sundarbans, which includes the forested islands, settled islands, and other important, significant, features that characterize this delta that we call Sundarbans. Now, when we say that it is recurrent, it is that there is a context, political and economic context for disasters, and you understand them better when you look at a vulnerable landscape. Is when I actually look at the historical trajectory of the Sundarbans. Why did these settled islands need such embankments? If we look at this, can I have the slide number 19, please? Slide number 19. Now, this is a typical picture of an embankment, which is a mud wall, which is also a very important pathway that connects different portions, different places on an island, as well as this is something that connects one island to another. Of course, when you reach one end of an island, you just go down, get on a boat and just moves across the river to another island. But my question, which is central, that why did we at all have these embankments in place? Can we have slide number 18, please? Now, this is where we zero in on a region which was, not only vulnerable in the sense that moment we call Sundarbans, we attach a sense of layer of vulnerability to it, almost taking its naturality for granted. It is here that we try and denaturalize the so-called natural. In other words, what I'm trying to suggest is that a region was created, constituted into a vulnerable landscape by a particular process. Can I have slide number 18, please? Can you hear? Thank you. That it was, the early century of the British colonial rule in India. If you look at the first 100 years of the colonial rule of the East India Company, you would find that obviously benefiting largely from the Industrial Revolution of England, land was considered as a very significant asset, number one, and forest was considered as limiting, that the more you have forest, the less land you have for cultivation, which was one of the major sources of the revenue, obviously something needless to say, for the company's cover in the early years. And therefore, for the first 100 years, there was absolutely clearing of forest that took place in colonial Sundarbans, where the laborers were indentured from different parts of India. And that is why you have a very significant tribal or Adivasi settlement in different parts of the Sundarban who were indentured as the laborers to sort of engage in this process of reclamation of land, primarily from the water and the forest. Of course, we know that the permanent settlement for the rest of Bengal, but unfortunately, Sundarban was not included in the permanent settlement. It was kept out of permanent settlement because of its peculiar watery, fluid landscape, where demarcating land from water was always a problem. And therefore, to prevent zamindars from making inroads into these lands, wetlands, government had to devise a number of policies, implement number of acts in order to, make the clearing of forest and settlement of people possible. So it was for the whole of early sort of 19th century and the second half, what we saw, the undivided, unpartitioned Sundarbans of erstwhile, what we call today Bangladesh and India, particularly Bakharganj, Khulna, Jasor, these parts were reclaimed first, and the places closer to the forest, to the Bay of Bengal, were only towards the later part of almost the end of 19th century, after the passing of the Forest Act, well into the 20th century, the initial part, they were ultimately kind of spared and the forest was retained. But the first 100 years, 150 years, it is the clearing of this forest which allowed for settlement to take place, where the wealthy people, sometimes direct settlement with the tillers who were available to till the soil, they were given, they were considered as grantees, given lands to cultivate, and it entirely fell upon them to sort of reclaim the land and make it possible for rice cultivation, etc., which served two purposes. One was revenue, and also to make this frontier, which was almost lying absolutely unguarded, for the pirates to attack and create a major problem for the colonial government, that to make this place populated, look as though they are populated, so that could effectively kind of serve as a natural frontier. Now, obviously, such settlement allowed for the embankment to be built, because the natural process of siltation could not raise the land sufficiently above the water level during its high tide. And hence, to protect these islands, which were already getting settled, there had to be a mud wall built all around it to protect them. That's how the story of the embankment came in and became constitutive part of Sundarbans topography. These embankments, even this speaks largely true for the entire Gangetic Delta, that the embankments of these baths as a flood control strategy proved disastrous over a period of time, as it not only clogged channels of the rivers, it caused river to run in a manner in which it often ate into the existing land, although the particular river current, particular way in which river flowed in a particular direction, could also allow for the possibility of a land emerging at the other end, which we often call the new land. So it was the peculiarity of the watery fluidity of the delta produced under colonial rule in a particular way, with its all hydrology, which accounted for its serious vulnerable nature. Something which is what we are kind of condemned to see, sort of destined to see in the post-independent India. These earthen embankments, slide number 20, please. These baths and embankments, which are supposed to protect people from their daily inundation, spell disaster for them. Baths are eroded both by river currents, which are kind of imperceptible, something that happens on an everyday basis, whereby the river flows in a particular manner, eating into the very, very base of the embankment in such a way that the embankment becomes hollow at the bottom and the top simply caves in during high tide. And the other is the embankments are breached, they are damaged, they collapse, and they inundate during a cyclone or a super cyclone. These baths and embankments, which are supposed to protect people from their daily inundation, the first lifeline goes, the embankment collapses. It leaves villages and tracts of agricultural land inundated for a considerable long period of time. A couple of quick slides might give you an idea as to what happens. This is a jetty which is completely sort of disappearing into the water, almost on the verge of disappearing. The embankment, the slide number 22, please. Now, this is an embankment path, but which absolutely bridge, not only bridge, but if you have a very close look, you understand that the height of the embankment is such that there is very little protection left for the villagers or their lands, which you could see the other side. The gentleman with his cycle, to his left, you have the agricultural lands. 23 slide, please. This is once again caving in. This is a pathway, this is an embankment, but it's particularly caving in because, as I said, that the bottom has suddenly become very, very hollow, absolutely vacuous, therefore not being able to hold the top any longer. And it's almost leaning onto the river and is going to go very soon. Slide 24, please. You could see that absolutely broken top of the embankment, which is almost non-negotiable. You cannot even walk, and during monsoon, you cannot even stand erect, let alone walk along this terrain. 25, please. Slide. This is a typical case of a complete, flooding, inundation of an island. You could see that the embankment completely goes. You have the people already, lined up on the embankment, and the village is completely sort of inundated with brackish, salt saline water. The whole of Gangetic Delta, where we have evidence and records of how land often been lost to the water. The classic case of Malda and Murshidabad. That erosion and disappearance of land, but it is all about the water which is fresh. It's a fresh flooding. Fresh water which floods, inundates, and once the water recedes, retreats, it allows for the field to become cultivable. But this is exactly contrary to what happens and unfolds in the Sundarbans. It is the saline water inundation. Because, as I said, it is the water hurtling down the Himalayas, which kind of, gets to meet the river currents from Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean. And it's the brackishness of the water which makes houses go under the water in no time. Their roofs collapse, fly away. Their agricultural fields completely get salinated. That not only destroys the current prospect of a harvest or an agriculture, but it leaves the agricultural fields unsuitable for cultivation in years to come. We had a complete saline inundation after Ayla, and the same had happened after Amphan. So the people who were coming back with lands, with no lands whatsoever, they kind of, it was as if the brackish water was the greatest leveler. It ironed out the differences between those who were inside, the one who never migrated out, and the ones who were coming back, as the process of reverse migration was on because of the COVID-19. And their ponds, the only source of a fresh water, if you want to wash your face, you go to the pond. That gets salinated, that gets contaminated, and the fish die. All livestock are absolutely, they go haywire, killed. And that's exactly the scenario which Amphan has left them in. Just to quickly give you a sense of what has Amphan done this time. Can I have slide number 29, please? the whole village is inundated. A child and mother. 30 slide, please. This is a surge. You can make, you can now probably will be able to make out that with such surge, what you have for embankment doesn't, stand anymore as being a very significantly protective wall that separates land from water and, people from disaster. 31 slide, please. Life on the threshold, almost, having lost everything. Now, it is the peculiar constitution of this land and landscape with their embankments that spell disaster for people. Not only during a cyclone like Amphan, or even without, as I said, the imperceptible process of daily erosion that takes place when a river goes across, the flows across along a particular island, eating into its land, then you have no other alternative but to constantly be on the back foot. You almost fight with your back to the wall. A slide, will give you a kind of an idea, although this is a kind of a survey, kind of a map, which was procured long back. It is slide number 27, please. If I could have slide number 27. This is a picture of what exactly I mean by the everyday erosion. This is the land space on an island which remain between rivers on both sides. As the rivers are eating into the land on both sides, they seem to be sort of, flowing